There it is. Broadcast.
All right.
Live.
It's live. Let me share it. I don't have any followers on my page. I know there's nobody watching. That's okay. This is actually my very first podcast that I'm doing right now. And so welcome everybody to another episode of Whit's World. Today I have a very special guest, the gentleman who actually introduced me to the world of podcasts, Mr. Edgar Hernandez, one of my good friends. We've known each other for too long. Sometimes it feels like.
Yeah, December 2005. We've crossed paths before.
I was in a band called Substance A. You didn't want to talk to me. I was a short little white guy with bald bass player, but we had a hot chick singer. Nobody was looking at me.
There's been really no gaps in between me talking to you.
Yeah.
I mean, with the exception of me just taking a break from going on partying balls all the time. I'm like, I don't know how you guys do it day in and day out, but I have to remind them, like, this is their profession, duh.
It's a tough job. So first thing I wanted to talk about was, who is it who inspired you to start doing a podcast? And how did your channel really begin?
Well, the main person that inspired me was Joe Rogan. This was roughly around 2011, 2012. Back then, it was just him and Brian Redban, and they would use, I think it was Ustream and Justin TV or something like that. And to me, it was a comedy podcast. Like, it was hilarious. They talked about some crazy shit. They would get balls fucking stoned to the gills, dude, and then just talk a bunch of shit. And it was raunchy. They used really weird webcams. Like, the quality back then wasn't that prime like it is now. But that's initially what inspired me. And then fast forward, while I was in audio school, in Alhambra, I did my very first podcast with a renowned producer and engineer that was also my instructor. His name is Mike Benicos. He's still around. He's actually part of the staff at Musicians Institute in Hollywood. And that was my first one. And I had someone else engineer it for me, which nowadays you can do everything at your own helm. Not always recommended, but if you can multitask and you're good at it, do it. This platform here is very simple. Click and, plug in and whatever. But the mistake I made on my first podcast is I used a better microphone on his voice. So I used an SM57 on mine. And if you're familiar with SM57s, they're very skinny. They look like almost like a pencil. And I used a Rode condenser mic on him with a pop filter, just gave him the treatment. So obviously my first podcast that I did wound up like favoring the guest and not equally. But I learned quickly just because I was in audio school. And then I did a disastrous one with my classmates. They were all just too stoned. I was on the wagon on a sober trip back then. This was 2012. I remember there was like 2 years I wasn't partying, and you guys were a part of that. So
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and I one day
you didn't really come out that much.
No, I did, but I didn't participate. And this is when I was going to go see you guys at like Cinespace, 58 Bar and Grill. There was even one time where I forgot where it was, and someone handed me a beer, and I'm like, I can't, man, not right now. I'm on the wagon. They're like, what? And I'm like, yeah.
Yep.
So, the podcast was disastrous with my classmates. They were just very uncooperative. And I'm like, okay, note to self, get people that actually know what the fuck they're talking about and at least can steer you in the right direction. Now, where I hit my aha moment with podcasting was as I kept watching Joe Rogan. Adam Carolla was another inspiration. I saw that they were dialed down. I'm like, okay, so this podcasting thing, it's obviously it's not a terrestrial radio kind of format. It was just kind of like a very liberal platform where you can just take full advantage and it's uncensored too. And that's what really intrigued me. I was like, oh, fuck, you can cuss? I'm like, oh,
but did you start off listening to him or start off with the video?
I started off with just the audio part because I didn't know too much about the video aspect just yet. I was barely diving into it. I know there was webcams involved and there's hardware you had to buy. But I'm like, well, it's easier just to set up a bunch of microphones, get a bunch of people together and just start talking shit. And, fast forward, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I should just up the production, maybe get like a structured kind of podcast. And I had a co-host back then. His name's Kyle. And my very first debut kind of podcast was with him in my bedroom. We were just holding mics.
But how did you? Okay, so while you were doing this,
with you guys the night before,
so you were holding microphones, like I'm assuming, like not microphones like these.
They were what? It was a cheap Radio Shack mic. I forgot the model.
Now, how did you plug that? You plugged it into like a a PA system or like a
No.
soundboard?
So, granted, I've been at audio school, so I kind of knew what to do, and I already had a little tiny M box. It was blue and white, and it had 2 inputs. It was a 2-input interface. Obviously, for people who don't know what an interface is, it's just one big ass sound card that connects to your computer. And it's not like old school, traditional analog equipment where you could just plug into a mixer and it comes out on the PA and the speakers. Here, I mean, it's digital technology translating ones and zeros and to make it sound like it's analog. So I had that into a cracked version of Pro Tools for Windows 7. The cracked version was just like, it had like blotches here and there. There was like a button missing on the transport. The inputs were named all incorrectly, but it worked. I'm like, okay, I just got to manually work with this. So, and then I had to go hit record and then hold the mic up. And back then, lesson learned, if you try, the purpose of podcasting is not to do so much editing on the go. And that's what I was trying to do. And I'm like, you just got to let it flow and then worry about it later.
Well, to be honest, I'm already feeling it right now. Like, truth be told, this is my very first time that I'm actually in charge of the podcast. I've been a guest a few times, with you. I kind of get on there and I just get to talk. But when you're sitting in this chair, now I'm kind of understanding what you're going through, because like literally, like I'm looking at I'm like, okay, is this set up? Is this set up? Okay, is it actually streaming? Did it share? Okay, do I need to look over here? And then I'm like, what the fuck did he just say? I totally didn't even hear it. So it's it's difficult to like stay present, but also so having someone dedicated to doing that would be incredible. Like
that's why you see guys like Jamie Vernon, who is Joe Rogan's producer now. He's a one-man show. He's doing the sound and the switchboard for the cameras.
Jeez.
And he's on hand he's a one-man show. He's got tech support. He is the tech support right then and there. He's got everything dialed down. And I'm like, shit, that must be nice to have a producer that, you don't have to worry about all the technical stuff.
And that's exactly how I feel sometimes, just being a musician and also being in charge of the PA system while you're in the band. So I can see how when I'm on stage, I want to be an artist. I want to be involved in the music and involved in the singing and this, but then is the sound okay? Is there any feedback? Are the monitors good? So you kind of have to balance both sides. It's exactly the same thing, only different, which makes no sense. But being able to be present, have a conversation, talk about some fun stuff, but then also be able to produce it at the same time. Wow.
And you haven't even scratched the surface on this type of platform, because you can have a green screen going on, you can have a banner. And I'm barely tapping into that too. But ultimately, what this podcasting art form kind of taught me as I went along and just learned on the go. I just kept doing it. I learned one thing, that repetition, like a consistent schedule to do it, is very key. I made it a habit to at least do it once every 2 weeks. And that's what kind of caught momentum for me. And then things started happening. I remember while my old employer, where I was working in West Hollywood, one of my students had a brother that was a pretty popular professional NFL player. He's like, hey, you do podcasts? Let's get my brother on it. And I was like, yeah. Like,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it was Amir Abdullah. Amir Abdullah used to play for the Detroit Lions. He was a running back. And I had him and his brother, Kareem.
Wow, that's cool.
And I was like, shit, that's how I knew. I'm like, but that podcast single-handedly, it boosted me in every type of like edge rank. Edge rank is like your online presence and stuff like that.